For number 1, we have to factorize and solve 2x squared plus 13x plus 15 is equal to 0. So we first would have to multiply the coefficient of x squared with our number term, which is 15. So 2 times 15 gives us 30. That means we are looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 30, and those same two numbers should add to give us 13. So we are now going to look at the factors of 30. We've got 1 and 30, we've got 2 and 15, we've got 3 and 10, and we've got 5 and 6. The numbers that also add up to give us 13 are 3 and 10. So we are going to use 3 times 10 to give us 30, and 3 plus 10 to give us 13. We will now put these factors in the brackets, and we will first start by writing 2x squared, which is our first term. We are then going to break up the 13x into its sum, and its sum is 3 plus 10. So instead of writing 13x, we are just going to break it up into plus 3x plus 10x, and then the plus 15 in the equation also remains the same. We are then going to split this equation in the middle, so we have two terms on each side. The first two terms are 2x squared plus 3, and the second two terms are 10x plus 15. We now need to factorize each part of the equation separately, so we're going to start with the first part, and we're going to look for the common factors of 2x squared and 3x. So the common factor in 2x squared plus 3x is x, so we are going to put x outside, and in order to make x into 2x squared, we have to multiply it by 2x. And in order to make x into 3x, we have to multiply it by plus 3. So our first bracket is 2x plus 3, and in the second part of the equation, we have to keep that bracket term the same. So we are going to put 2x plus 3 there as well. We now need to check what we did to 2x in order to make it 10x, and we have multiplied it by 5. So we are going to put a plus 5 there. So our first factor for this equation is going to be 2x plus 3, because that's the common bracket we've got. And for the second bracket, we are going to combine the x and the plus 5 to make x plus 5. So this is the factorized form of the equation. And if we now want to solve this equation, we have to separately equate both brackets to 0. So first, we are going to put 2x plus 3 equal to 0. And in order to solve this, we would have to minus 3 on both sides. So that would give us 2x is equal to minus 3. We would then have to divide both sides by 2, which would give us x is equal to minus 3 over 2. For the second one, if x plus 5 is equal to 0, that means x would have to be equal to minus 5. So these are the two solutions for this equation. For number 2, we would first have to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 3, with our number term, which is 6. So 3 times 6 gives us 18. And that means we are looking for two numbers which multiply to give us 18. Those same two numbers should then add to give us 11. So we now need to look for the factors of 18. So we've got 1 and 18, we've got 2 and 9, and we've got 3 and 6. The ones that add up to give us 11 are 2 and 9. So we are going to use 9 times 2 to give us 18, and 9 plus 2 to give us 11. So we are now going to write this equation as 3x squared, and for the 11x, we are going to break it up into its sum. So instead of writing 11x, we are going to put plus 9x plus 2x, and the plus 6 would remain the same. We would then split the equation such that it has two terms on each side. So on the first part of the equation, we've got 3x squared plus 9, and on the second part, we've got 2x plus 6. So we are first going to factorize the first part of the equation, and the common factors in 3 and 9 are 3, so we're going to put 3, and the common factors in x squared and x is x. So we're going to put 3x as our common factor and open the bracket. In order to make 3x into 3x squared, we have multiplied it by x. And in order to make 3x into 9x, we have multiplied it by plus 3. And we are going to keep the x plus 3 the same bracket for the second part of the equation that we've split. We now need to check what we have done in order to make x into 2x, and we have multiplied it by a plus 2. So we now have the two factorized brackets for this equation. The first one will be x plus 3, and for the second bracket we are going to combine the 3x plus 2. If we want to solve this equation, we are now going to separately equate both brackets to 0. So if x plus 3 is equal to 0, that means x would have to be minus 3. And if 3x plus 2 is equal to 0, that would mean 3x is equal to minus 2. And if we divide by 3, that would give us x is equal to minus 2 over 3. And these are our two solutions for number 2. So here for number 1, we have to factorize and solve 2x squared minus x minus 3 is equal to 0. So first we're going to have to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 2, with minus 3, and that gives us minus 6. So this means we are finding two numbers that multiply to give us minus 6, and the same two numbers should add to give us a negative 1, because minus x means minus 1x. So the same two numbers should add to give us minus 1. So if we look at the factors of 6, we have 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. Because we are multiplying to get a negative number and also adding to get a negative number, that means the bigger factor would have to be negative. So if we do 1 plus negative 6, that gives us negative 5, so we're not going to use that. But if we do 2 plus negative 3, that gives us negative 1. So the two factors that we will be using are 2 and negative 3 to multiply to give us minus 6 and add to give us negative 1. So we are going to write this as 2x squared, and we're now going to break up the minus x into its sum. So we are going to write it as plus 2x minus 3x, and we're going to keep the minus 3 equal to 0 as it is. We then split the equation into 2, and we look at the first part of the equation and factorize that by looking at the common factors in 2x squared and 2x. So the common factors are 2x, and we can now open the bracket. In order to make 2x into 2x squared, we have multiplied it by x. And in order to make 2x into plus 2x, we have just multiplied it by 1. So because one of our brackets is x plus 1, we put that same bracket in the second part of the equation, and we now need to look at what we did to x in order to make it into minus 3x. So in order to make x into minus 3x, we have to multiply it by minus 3, so we're going to put a minus 3 there. So we can now write our factors as x plus 1, which was the first bracket we got, and for the second bracket we collect the 2x and the minus 3 from there to make 2x minus 3. So we now have the factorized form of our equation, and if we want to solve it, we have to separate each part of the equation and equate it to 0. So if x plus 1 is equal to 0, that means x must be equal to minus 1. And if 2x minus 3 is equal to 0, we would first have to plus 3 on both sides to make 2x is equal to 3, and then divide both sides by 2 to get x is equal to 3 over 2. So here are our two solutions for this equation. For number 2, we are factorizing and solving 4x squared plus 19x minus 30 is equal to 0. So we are first going to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 4, with the number term, which is minus 30, and that gives us minus 120. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give us minus 120. And those same two numbers will need to add to give us 19. So if we look at the factors of 120, we have 1 and 120, 2 and 60, 3 and 40, 4 and 30, 5 and 24, 6 and 20, 7 is not a factor, but we can do 8 and 15, 9 is also not a factor, but we can use 10 and 12. Because we are multiplying to get a negative number, but adding to get a positive number, that means the smaller factors are going to be negative. We can now check which one adds to give us 19. So if we do minus 10 plus 12, that gives us 2. Minus 8 plus 15, that would give us 7. Minus 6 plus 20 would give us 14. And minus 5 plus 24 gives us 19, which is the number we are looking for. So the two factors we will use to give us minus 120 will be 24 and minus 5, because they also add to give us 19. We can now write this equation as 4x squared, and we can break up the 19x into its sum, which is plus 24x minus 5x, and we keep the minus 30 as it is. We then split the equation into half, and we factorize the first part of the equation. So the common factors in 4 and 24 are 4, and the common factors between x squared and x is x. We then open the bracket and look at what we did to 4x in order to make it 4x squared. So in order to make 4x into 4x squared, we have multiplied it by x. And in order to make 4x into 24x, we have multiplied it by 6. So we put a plus 6 there. Because our first bracket is x plus 6, in the second part of the equation, we keep the x plus 6 as well. We now check what we did to x in order to make it minus 5x, and we have multiplied it by minus 5. So we put a minus 5 at the front of that bracket. So now we have our two factors. Our first factor will be x plus 6, and the second factor will be the 4x and the negative 5. So we put it as 4x minus 5. So this is our factorized form of the equation. And if we want to solve it, we have to separately equate both brackets to 0. So here we know that if x plus 6 is equal to 0, that means x has to be minus 6. In the second bracket, if 4x minus 5 is equal to 0, we first have to add 5 onto both sides. So that becomes 4x is equal to 5. And then we divide both sides by 4. So we get x is equal to 5 over 4. And here are our two solutions for this equation. So for number 1, we have to factorize and solve 4x squared plus 4x minus 15 is equal to 0. So we are first going to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 4, with the number term, which is minus 15. So 4 times minus 15 gives us minus 60, which means we are looking for two factors to give us minus 60. Those same two numbers should add to give us 4. So we now need to look for the factors of minus 60. And to do that, we can first look at the factors of just 60. So we've got 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, 4 and 15, 5 and 12, 6 and 10. Because we are multiplying to get a negative product, that means the smaller factors would have to be negative. So if you put a negative sign by all the smaller numbers, the two that would add to give us a positive 4 is minus 6 and 10. So we can write our two factors as minus 6 and 10. We are now going to write the equation with 4x broken up into its products. So we are going to keep the 4x squared as it is, but now instead of writing 4x, we are going to put the minus 6x plus 10x, which make the plus 4. And then the minus 15 also stays the same. We are then going to split the equation in the middle into 2. So for the first part, we are going to check for the common factors. The common factors of 4 and 6 is 2. And in x squared and x, the common factor is x. So we are going to put 2x as our common factor for the first part. We are then going to open the bracket and see what we have done to 2x to make it into 4x squared. And we have to multiply that by another 2x to make it 4x squared. To make 2x into minus 6x, we have to multiply it by minus 3. So that is our first factor. We are going to keep the first factor the same in the second part of the equation. In order to make 2x into 10x, we have to multiply it by 5. So we are going to put a plus 5 here. We can then check to see if it works for the second term of the bracket. So if we do 5 times minus 3, that gives us minus 15, and that shows that our factors work. We can then write the two factors. So our first factor is going to be 2x minus 3, and the second factor is going to be the 2x from here and the plus 5 from there. So we write the second factor as 2x plus 5. So this is our factorized form, and if we now want to solve it, we are going to separately equate both factors to 0. So for the first one, we put 2x minus 3 is equal to 0. And for the second one, we are going to put 2x plus 5 is equal to 0. So for the first one, if 2x minus 3 is equal to 0, we can add 3 on both sides, which would give us 2x is equal to 3. We then divide both sides by 2, and that would give us x is equal to 3 over 2. For the second one, if 2x plus 5 is equal to 0, we can take away 5 on both sides, so that would be 2x is equal to minus 5, which means x is equal to minus 5 over 2, and those are our two solutions. For number 2, we have to factorize and solve 5a squared minus 13a plus 6 is equal to 0. We are first going to multiply the coefficient of a squared, which is 5, with the number term, which is 6. 5 times 6 gives us 30, which means we are looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 30, and those same two numbers should add to give us minus 13. Because we are multiplying to get a positive number but adding to get a negative number, that means we are going to have to look at the negative factors of 30. So we have minus 1 and minus 30, minus 2 and minus 15, minus 3 and minus 10, and minus 5 and minus 6. So if we add negative 1 and 30, that gives us negative 31, so we cannot use those. Negative 2 and negative 15 add to give us negative 17, so it's not that. But if we add negative 3 and negative 10, those add to give us negative 13. So we will be using negative 3 and negative 10 as our factors of 30, because they also add up to give negative 13. We are now going to write this equation and keep the 5a squared as it is, but we are going to break up the negative 13a into its sum, which is minus 3a minus 10a, and we are going to keep the plus 6 as it is. We are then going to split this equation into two parts and factorize each of these separately. So the common factor in the first part is a, so we are going to put a and open the bracket. In order to make a into 5a squared, we have to multiply it by 5a, and in order to make a into minus 3a, we have to multiply it by minus 3. We then keep that bracket the same in the second part of the equation, and we then need to check what we have done to 5a in order to make it into minus 10a. So to make 5a into minus 10a, we have to multiply it by minus 2. And we can see that if we do minus 2 times minus 3, that also gives us 6, which means our factorization is correct. We can then write our first bracket as 5a minus 3, and for the second bracket, we are going to take the a from here and the negative 2 from there to make a minus 2 our second factor. So we have now factorized the equation, and if we want to solve this, we separately equate both of these factors to 0. So if 5a minus 3 is equal to 0, we can first add 3 onto both sides to make 5a is equal to 3. And if we divide both sides by 5, that makes a equal to 3 over 5. For the second bracket, we know that if a minus 2 is equal to 0, that means a must be equal to 2. So these are our two solutions for number 2. So for number 1, we have to factorize and solve 3x squared minus 8x plus 4 is equal to 0. So we are first going to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 3, with 4, which gives us 12. So we are looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 12, and those same two numbers should add to give us minus 8. So we have to look for the factors of 12. We've got 1 and 12, we've got 2 and 6, and we've got 3 and 4. Because we are multiplying to get a positive number, that means both the factors either have to be positive or negative. Because we are adding to get a negative number, that means both factors would have to be negative. So if we add all these numbers, we can see what gives us negative 8. Negative 1 and negative 12 add to give us negative 13. Negative 2 and negative 6 add to give us negative 8, and negative 3 and negative 4 add to give us negative 7. So the two factors that we'll be using is negative 2 and negative 6, which multiply to give us 12 and also add to give us negative 8. We are then going to keep the 3x squared as it is, but we will break the minus 8x into its sum, which will be minus 2x minus 6x, and we will also keep the plus 4 as it is. We will then split the equation such that we've got two terms on each side, And for the first part of the equation, we can factorize that separately. So to factorize 3x squared minus 2x, we put the common factor, which is x, outside. And in order to make x into 3x squared, we have multiplied it by 3x. In order to make x into minus 2x, we have multiplied it by minus 2. We keep the bracket 3x minus 2 the same for the second half of the equation, and we now need to check what we have done to 3x in order to make it minus 6x. And to make 3x into minus 6x, we have to multiply it by minus 2. So to write our two factors for this equation, we have 3x minus 2 as the first factor in the first bracket, and for the second factor in the second bracket, we will put x and the minus 2, so it will be x minus 2. We have factorized this equation, and if we then want to solve it, we would equate both to 0 separately. 3x would be equal to 2, and if we divide both sides by 3, x would be equal to 2 over 3. For the second bracket, if x minus 2 is equal to 0, that means x would have to be equal to 2. So these are the two solutions for number 1. For number 2, we have to factorize and solve 12y squared plus 7y plus 1 is equal to 0. So we are first going to multiply 12 and 1, which means we are looking for a number that multiplies to give us 12. And those same two numbers should add to give us 7. So we are going to look for the factors of 12, which are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. The ones that add to give us 7 are 3 and 4. So we are going to use 3 times 4 to give us 12, and 3 plus 4 to give us 7. So we are going to keep the 12y squared as it is, but we will break 7y into its sum. So we are going to write it as 3y plus 4y, and we will keep the plus 1 as it is. We are then going to split the equation into two parts, such that we've got two terms on each side. And for the first part of the equation, we can factorize that by looking for the common factors of 12y squared and 3y, which would be 3y. We then open the brackets, and in order to make 3y into 12y squared, we have multiplied it by 4y. In order to make 3y into 3y, we have just multiplied it by 1, so we will put plus 1 and close the bracket. We will keep that bracket 4y plus 1 the same for the second half of the equation, and we need to check what we have done to 4y to make it 4y, and we have just multiplied that by a 1, so we will put a plus 1 there. So our first bracket for this equation would be 4y plus 1, and for the second bracket we would write 3y plus 1. So this is factorized, and if we want to solve it, we would equate each bracket to 0 separately. So we've got 4y plus 1 is equal to 0, and 3y plus 1 is equal to 0. So for the first bracket, we would minus 1 on both sides to get 4y is equal to minus 1, which means y would be equal to minus 1 over 4. For the second bracket, we would also minus 1 on both sides, so we would get 3y is equal to minus 1, which means y would be equal to minus 1 over 3. And these would be the two solutions for number 2. So here are a few practice questions, so you can feel free to pause the video and have a go if you like. So for number 1, we have to factorize 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. So first we multiply 2 and 3, which gives us 6. And that means we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 6. And the same two numbers should add to give us 7. So looking at the factors of 6, we've got 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. And 1 and 6 also add to give us 7. So we are going to use 1 and 6 as our factors. We would now write the 2x squared as it is and break up 7x into its sum. So we would write plus x for the 1, and for the 6 we would put plus 6x, and we would keep the plus 3 as it is. We then split the equation in the middle into two parts. So for the first part, if we factorize that, we would put x out as the common factor, and to make x into 2x squared, we have to multiply it by 2x, and to make x into x, we just have to multiply it by 1. We keep 2x plus 1 the same for the second half of the equation, and to make 2x into 6x, we have multiplied it by 3, so we put plus 3 there. So our first bracket will be 2x plus 1, and the second bracket would be x plus 3. And because the question is asking us to factorize it, we would leave that as our final answer. For number 2, we have to factorize 3x squared minus 10x plus 3 is equal to 0. So first, we would have to multiply 3 and 3, which gives us 9. And that means we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 9. And those same two numbers should add to give us minus 10. So looking at the factors of 9, we've got 1 and 9 and 3 and 3. Because they are multiplying to give a positive number, but adding to give a negative number, that means we need to look at the negative factors of 9. And if we look at which one adds to give us negative 10, it is negative 1 and 9. So we are going to use minus 1 and minus 9 because they add to give us minus 10. We are then going to write 3x squared as it is, but break minus 10x into its sum. So we will write minus x or minus 1x and minus 9x and keep the plus 3 as it is. We are then going to split the equation in the middle such that we've got 2 terms on each side. And for the first part, we are going to factorize that separately by putting x outside. We then open the bracket, and in order to make x into 3x squared, we would have to multiply that by 3x, so we put 3x as our first term in the bracket. And in order to make x into minus x, we would have to multiply that by minus 1. The bracket 3x minus 1 would then remain the same for the second half of the equation. And in order to make 3x into minus 9x, we have to multiply that by minus 3. So we put a minus 3 outside that bracket. So we now have our two factors. The first bracket will be 3x minus 1, and the second bracket will be x minus 3. And because this question is just asking us to factorize, this is our final answer for number 2. For number 3, we have to solve 6y squared plus 17y plus 12 is equal to 0. So first we are going to multiply 6 and 12, which gives us 72. And that means we are looking for two factors that multiply to give us 72. And those same two factors should add to give us 17. So looking at the factors of 72, we've got 1 and 72, 2 and 36, 3 and 24, 4 and 18. 5 is not a factor, but we've got 6 and 12. 7 is also not a factor, but we've got 8 and 9. We now need to look at which of these factors add to give us 17. And if we add 8 and 9, that gives us 17. So we will be using 8 and 9, which multiply to give us 72, and add to give us 17. We then keep the 6y squared as it is, but break up 17y into its sum. So we will write plus 8y plus 9y, and we'll keep the plus 12 as it is. We then split the equation in the middle into two parts and first factorize the 6y squared plus 8y. So the common factor in 6y squared plus 8y is 2y, so we put 2y and open our bracket. In order to make 2y into 6y squared, we would multiply that by 3y, and in order to make 2y into 8y, we would multiply that by plus 4. We then keep 3y plus 4, the same bracket for the second part of the equation. In order to make 3y into 9y, we would have to multiply that by plus 3, so we put a plus 3 outside the second bracket. So we now have our two factors. The first factor would be 3y plus 4, and the second factor would be 2y plus 3. Because this question is asking to solve the equation, we would have to equate each of the brackets to 0 separately. So for the first bracket, we've got 3y plus 4 is equal to 0. If we minus 4 on both sides, we will get 3y is equal to minus 4. And if we now divide both sides by 3, we will get y is equal to minus 4 over 3. For the second bracket, we have 2y plus 3 is equal to 0. So if we minus 3 on both sides, we will get 2y is equal to minus 3. And if we divide both sides by 2, we will get y is equal to minus 3 over 2. And these are our two solutions for number 3.